All right, we have some breaking news. We're now learning that the U.S. Department of Defense has confirmed a suspected rocket attack has apparently injured American troops stationed in Iraq. A Pentagon spokesperson says that the attack targeted U.S. and coalition forces at the Al-Assad air base, apparently injuring several U.S. personnel. The Pentagon reports a damage assessment is currently underway. I want to bring in our ABC News senior Pentagon reporter, Louis Martinez. He's joining us now from the Pentagon with more on this. So, Louis, look, I know that this is early, but what other information do we have about this attack here?
Kena, we are learning from U.S. and Iraqi officials that there are at least 2 rockets that were fired at the Al-Assad base. Now, this is a sprawling base in western Iraq. It's frequently under attack over the last year and a half, especially since what happened over there in Israel between Hamas and Israel. Now, one of the things that we've seen here is that we are getting initial indications that several American personnel were injured. Now, this is quite different than the norm because typically when these incidents occur, we get word that there were very few casualties, if any. Typically, the rockets either don't reach the base, or if they do, there are no injuries. But in this case, a notch above, which is why this is very noteworthy, and it's very notable to figure out exactly what's going to be the next step, because last week the United States retaliated against one of those militia groups as they were preparing to launch missiles or rockets from in an area southwest of Baghdad, and that followed a recent series of about 2 incidents in 1 week where those Iranian-backed militia groups had fired at U.S. bases. Those attacks were the first ones since April, and the ones in April were the first since back in February. And back in February, like almost daily attacks in Iraq and Syria stopped following U.S. airstrikes. So the question now becomes, how will the United States military respond? And based on past practice, I think it is very likely that we may see some kind of a retaliatory strike. However, given the climate right now and what's happening between Iran and Israel, and whether Iran will retaliate potentially against Israel because of the assassination of the Hamas leader in Tehran, I think things have to be seen through a different prism. And I think that's something that the U.S. leaders will definitely look at.
Right. We know from the G7, Louis, we're hearing things like we urge all involved parties to once again refrain from perpetuating the current destructive cycle of retaliatory violence. But when you hear this, Louis, and now we have American servicemen and women potentially injured here, I'm curious how you're assessing this. Responsibility is a heavy word. We don't know who, but we know that we've been seeing, our forces go up against these Iranian proxies. But there's also Iranian-backed militia groups in both Iraq and Syria. Any speculation that they're responsible here?
Typically, they look at one particular group called Kataib Hezbollah. They're the group that has been prominently backed by Iran. They are the ones that were most responsible for the more than 170 attacks against U.S. personnel both in Iraq and Syria since last October. And so when the United States looks at this, they look and try to figure out who launched the attack, whether they are backed by Iran. And then in this case, most prominently it will be, and most likely it will be, Kataib Hezbollah. Now, again, the United States has responded in the past militarily against Kataib Hezbollah, launching strikes. And one of the main reasons why those dozens and dozens of attacks stopped back in early February was because the United States launched a high-profile attack against a senior leader of the militia group, and that strike followed those big retaliatory strikes that we saw after the deaths of 3 American soldiers inside of Syria at Tower 22. So these would be the first American casualties since that incident, and I think we kind of have to look at it again. Is this going to trigger another U.S. military response against these militia groups?